Welcome back to Mr. Midnight. Before we start, I need to tell you something important. These stories are real. They happen to real people in small towns across Oregon. And after you hear them, you'll never look at quiet little towns the same way again. Tonight, I'm sharing 7 true stories that will keep you up at night. One is about a woman who cooked food for workers in the mountains until she found out what was really in the meat. Another is about a gas station worker who realized her customers weren't actually people anymore. But I'm not going to tell you about the rest. You need to hear those for yourself. These things happened in tiny Oregon towns, the kind of places with maybe 400 or 500 people, where everybody knows everybody. The kind of places you might drive through and think, how peaceful. But some of these towns are hiding terrible secrets. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Trust me, once you hear what I'm about to tell you, you'll want to hear more. Okay, let's jump into story number 1. My name is Maria Santos, and I've been running my food truck business for 6 years now. Started small after my divorce, just me and a beat-up truck serving construction sites around Portland. Nothing fancy, just good hot meals for working people who don't have time to drive into town for lunch. I've fed everyone from road crews to warehouse workers, and I thought I'd seen every kind of job site there was. But what happened last summer in a little logging town called Oak Ridge changed everything I thought I knew about food service. Some contracts aren't worth any amount of money. The call came on a Tuesday morning in June. I was prepping for my usual route when my phone rang. The guy on the other end introduced himself as Jake Morrison, foreman for Cascade Logging Operations in Oak Ridge. He said they'd heard good things about my catering service and wanted to hire me for daily lunch runs. The pay he offered made me nearly drop my prep knife. 3 times my normal rate, cash, payment, guaranteed contract for 3 months. We're pretty remote out here, Jake explained, his voice rough like he'd been smoking for decades. The boys work hard and they need good food. Previous caterer couldn't handle our specific requirements. I should have asked more questions about those requirements, but my 6-year-old daughter Isabella had been having more asthma attacks lately, and the specialist wanted to try a new treatment that insurance wouldn't cover. $1,500 a week was more money than I'd ever made. I said yes before I could think twice. Oak Ridge was a 2-hour drive from Portland, deep in the Cascade Mountains. The GPS took me down increasingly narrow roads until I was driving through dense forest with no cell phone signal. The town itself looked like it had seen better days, maybe 30 years ago. Most of the storefronts were boarded up, and the few people I saw looked at my bright red food truck like they'd never seen anything like it. The logging operation was 5 miles outside town, accessible only by a dirt road that wound through old-growth forest. Massive Douglas firs towered overhead, blocking out most of the sunlight even at noon. The worksite itself was impressive. Dozens of huge logging trucks, industrial equipment I couldn't even name, and a crew of about 40 men. Jake met me at the main gate. He was a big man, probably in his 50s, with arms like tree trunks and a handshake that could crack walnuts. But there was something odd about him. For someone who supposedly spent his days in the forest, his skin had this weird pale quality, and his teeth were too white, too sharp. "Welcome to Cascade Logging," he said, showing me where to set up. "The boys are excited to try your cooking. We've got specific dietary needs here, though. You'll need to use only the meat and vegetables we provide. Company policy, Hellfix, something about insurance and food safety." He led me to a refrigerated building that served as their food storage. Inside were massive freezers filled with what Jake said was locally sourced venison and organic vegetables. The meat looked fresh enough, though it had an unusual pinkish color, and the texture felt different from any venison I'd worked with before. When I asked about it, Jake just smiled and said it was a special local breed. "The boys need protein," he explained. "Lots of it. This work takes everything out of a man. The meat helps keep them strong." That first day, I cooked for 40 hungry loggers. They lined up at my truck like they hadn't eaten in days, ordering multiple servings of everything. What struck me was how fit they all looked. I'd fed plenty of construction crews, and usually there's a mix. Young guys, older guys, some in good shape, others carrying extra weight. But every single man in this crew looked like he could run a marathon. Even the ones who had to be in their 60s had the build of men half their age. The meat cooked differently than I expected. It stayed tender, no matter how long I grilled it, and when I tasted a small piece to check the seasoning, it had this slightly sweet flavor that I couldn't place. Not unpleasant, just different. The workers seemed to love it though. They cleaned their plates and came back for seconds. "Best meal we've had in months," one of them told me. His name was Pete, and he said he'd been logging for 30 years. "You keep cooking like this, and we'll keep you busy." The drive home that evening left me feeling optimistic. The work was steady, the pay was incredible, and the crew seemed happy. Isabella could get her treatment, and maybe I could finally stop worrying about money every month. But by the third day, I started noticing things that didn't add up. First, there was my energy level. I'd been tasting the food as I cooked, just small bites to check seasoning, but I felt amazing. My chronic back pain from years of standing in the ties of a truck had completely disappeared. I was sleeping better, waking up refreshed instead of dragging myself out of bed. When I mentioned it to Jake, he just nodded like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Good food does that," he said. "Proper nutrition makes all the difference." The workers started commenting on how I looked. "You're getting stronger," Pete told me on Friday. "First day you got here, you looked tired. Now you look like you could join the crew." I laughed it off, but when I looked in my truck's mirror, I had to admit they were right. My skin looked clearer, my eyes brighter. I'd even gained some muscle mass, which was impossible considering I'd been eating the same diet as always, except for those small tastes of their special meat. That weekend, away from Oak Ridge, I felt restless. Sunday night, I found myself craving the taste of that meat. Not hungry exactly, but craving it like I used to crave cigarettes when I was trying to quit. Monday couldn't come fast enough. The second week, Jake asked if I wanted to take some meat home for my daughter. "The boys tell me you've got a sick little girl," he said. "This meat, it's got special properties. Helps with all kinds of health problems. Might help with her breathing." Something in his tone made me uncomfortable. "I appreciate the offer, but I'll stick to her regular diet." Jake's expression darkened for just a moment before he smiled again. "Suit yourself, but the offer stands." That afternoon, while the crew was working, I decided to walk around the site. The logging operation was bigger than I'd realized, with buildings scattered throughout the forest. Behind the main equipment shed, I found what looked like a meat processing facility. Through the windows, I could see industrial freezers and cutting equipment that seemed too sophisticated for processing deer. That's when I saw them, backpacks and clothing, scattered in a pile behind the building. Hiking boots, camping gear, a bright yellow jacket with University of Oregon printed on it. My stomach turned as I realized what I was looking at. This wasn't gear left by workers. This was stuff from people who'd never made it home. I drove into the nearest town with cell service that evening and searched online for missing persons in the area. What I found made my blood run cold. Over the past 5 years, dozens of hikers, campers, and travelers had vanished in the forests around Oak Ridge. Young people mostly, healthy and strong. The kind of people who wouldn't be missed immediately, who might be weeks into a solo hiking trip before anyone reported them gone. But there were no missing person reports from Oak Ridge itself. None at all. Tuesday morning, I almost didn't go back. But Isabella needed another treatment, and I'd already committed to the contract. I convinced myself I was being paranoid, that there had to be an explanation. Maybe the gear belonged to workers, or Jake collected lost items from the forest. But when I tasted the meat that day, I really focused on the flavor. I knew. The sweetness, the texture, the way it made me feel. This wasn't venison. This was human flesh. And I'd been serving it for 2 weeks. I tried to keep cooking normally, but my hands were shaking. Jake noticed immediately. "Everything all right, Maria? You look pale." "Just tired," I managed. "Long drive." But Jake wasn't buying it. I could see him watching me throughout the lunch service. And when the workers started talking about how much better they felt since I'd started cooking, how much stronger and healthier, I realized the horrible truth. They knew exactly what they were eating. They'd been cannibalizing missing travelers for years, probably decades. And now, they'd made me part of it. That night, I tried to research everything I could about long-term cannibalism. What I found terrified me. The human body can become chemically dependent on human flesh, especially if it's consumed regularly over time. The proteins, the specific nutrients, it's BSS. They change your metabolism. People who eat human meat for extended periods can't survive without it. I'd been taking small tastes for 2 weeks. How much was already in my system? How much more before I couldn't stop? Wednesday, I showed up with a plan. I would serve the food, but not taste any of it. I'd document everything, take photos, gather evidence. Then I'd go to the police. But the moment I started cooking, my body revolted. The smell of the meat made my mouth water and my stomach clench with hunger. My hands trembled as I tried to ignore the craving. When Jake offered me a plate at lunch, I almost took it. "You're not eating," he observed. "That's not healthy, Maria. You need to keep your strength up." "I'm fine." "No, you're not." His voice was firm now, authoritative. "You're part of the family now. You can't just stop eating. Your body won't let you." That's when I understood. This wasn't just about serving food. They'd been converting me slowly, making me dependent on their diet. In a few more weeks, I'd be physically addicted to human flesh, unable to leave even if I wanted to. "I want to quit," I said. "Find another caterer." Jake laughed, and several workers who'd been listening joined in. "There is no other caterer, Maria. There's just us. And you're one of us now." I tried to leave, but when I got to my truck, the engine wouldn't start. Jake appeared beside me with a wrench in his hand. "Alternator cable came loose," he said casually. "Funny how that happens. Don't worry, we'll get you fixed up. But first, you should bring your daughter up here. Let us help with her breathing problems." The way he said it made my skin crawl. They wanted Isabella here. They wanted to feed her the meat, make her dependent too. Convert my 6-year-old daughter into a cannibal. "She's fine," I said quickly. "The treatments are working." "Are they?" Jake's smile was cold. "Because I hear those specialists are expensive, and insurance doesn't cover everything. Wouldn't it be easier if she just got better? Permanently?" I spent that night locked in my truck, pretending to sleep while planning my escape. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I told Jake I'd bring Isabella that weekend for treatment. I played along, asked about their medicine, even took a small bite of the meat to keep them from getting suspicious. It took everything I had not to eat more. Friday evening, I drove home and packed everything valuable I owned into my car. I spent the weekend getting Isabella ready, telling her we were going on a camping trip. Monday morning, I called Jake. "We're coming up today," I said. "Isabella's excited to try your special food." But when we arrived, I gave Isabella only vegetables and fruit I'd brought myself. I told her the meat was too spicy for kids. Jake watched me carefully during lunch service, and I could see suspicion growing in his eyes. "The girl needs protein," he said. "She's too thin." "She's fine." "No, she's not. Look at her. Pale, weak, breathing problems. She needs what we can give her." That afternoon, when I tried to leave, my truck wouldn't start again. This time, Jake didn't even pretend it was an accident. "You're not leaving, Maria, neither of you. This is your home now." I grabbed Isabella and ran for the only building with a lock, the old general store on the edge of the worksite. Inside, I found hunting rifles and ammunition that the previous store owner had left behind. I barricaded the door and windows while Isabella hugged her stuffed animal in the corner. "Mommy, what's happening?" she whispered. "We're playing hide and seek," I told her. "Stay quiet." Outside, I could hear the workers gathering. Jake's voice carried through the walls. "Maria, be reasonable. Come out and let's talk about this. Your daughter needs help." They tried to break in around midnight. I fired warning shots through the windows, and 3 of them charged the door. I had to shoot them. Even with bullets in their chests, they kept coming for several steps before finally dropping. The meat had made them stronger, but not bulletproof. In the chaos that followed, I grabbed Isabella and ran for the logging trucks. I'd driven big vehicles before, not logging trucks, but close enough. We crashed through the main gate and didn't stop driving until we reached the state police barracks in Eugene. The investigation took months. When authorities finally raided Oak Ridge, they found evidence of a cannibalistic operation that had been running for over 20 years. 47 people were arrested, including Jake and most of the logging crew. The meat processing facility contained remains from dozens of missing persons. The trial made national news. I testified about everything: the special meat, the dietary requirements, the missing person gear I'd found. It became the largest cannibalism case in Oregon history. But the worst part was what happened to me afterward. The doctor said I was lucky I'd only been exposed for 2 weeks. Some people in similar situations had been converted completely, unable to survive without human flesh. I went through weeks of medical detox, treating the chemical dependency like a drug addiction. The withdrawal was horrible, shaking, nausea, cravings that felt like my body was eating itself from the inside. Isabella recovered completely. She never knew what was really happening, and I'll never tell her. But sometimes, late at night when I'm cooking in my new restaurant, I catch myself remembering the taste of that meat, remembering how strong I felt, how healthy, how alive. The cravings never completely went away. They probably never will. I still cook for people, but now I stick to regular customers in the city. No more remote contracts, no matter how good the money sounds. Because I learned that some jobs change you in ways you can never undo. And some hungers, once awakened, never really sleep. My name is David Chen, and I've been teaching for 12 years. I started as a teacher's aide because I was too afraid to take a real teaching job. Anxiety, you know? But kids don't judge you for sweating through your shirt or forgetting what you were saying mid-sentence. Eventually, I got brave enough for my own classroom, spent 8 years teaching 3rd grade in Portland. Then my mom got sick, cancer, and I had to choose between staying close to her or starting my master's program. I chose her. She died anyway. After the funeral, I needed work that would let me think about anything except empty hospital rooms. Long-term substitute positions are perfect for that. Temporary pain, temporary responsibility. You walk into someone else's disaster, fix what you can, then leave. No attachment, no expectations of permanence. The call came on a Tuesday, Hermiston Elementary, 3-month position. Their 4th grade teacher had died suddenly. Heart attack, the principal said. 26 kids needed someone immediately. I should have asked more questions. The drive to Hermiston took me through farmland that seemed to stretch forever. Corn and wheat fields broken up by irrigation systems and chemical storage tanks with warning symbols I couldn't read from the highway. The town felt sleepy, like it was holding its breath. Most houses were small and old, but maintained with the kind of desperate care that comes from having nothing else. Every pickup truck had the same logo, AgriCorp. Hermiston Elementary looked like every school built in the 1960 seconds. Single-story brick, flat roof, windows that hadn't been washed in decades. But something was wrong with those windows. They all had metal bars. Not decorative ironwork, thick, industrial bars bolted directly into the brick. Mrs. Rodriguez met me in the parking lot. She was short and tense, kept checking her watch like she was late for something more important than introducing a new teacher. Mr. Chen, thank you for coming on such short notice. The children have been through a lot, Miss Patterson was. She paused, looking for the right word. Devoted. She led me through hallways that felt too quiet. No sound from classrooms, no kids in the halls. Every door had an electronic lock with a card reader, the kind you see in office buildings or psychiatric facilities. Security upgrade, Mrs. Rodriguez explained when she saw me staring. We can control everything from the main office. Room 14 was at the end of the hall. The lock clicked open with her card. Inside, everything was perfect. Too perfect. 26 desks in precise rows, each with a name card printed in identical font. The walls were covered with educational posters that looked freshly laminated and a behavior chart with every single student's name in the green Excellent Choices column. They should arrive soon, Mrs. Rodriguez said. They're very well behaved. When the students filed in, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. 26 4th graders entered in complete silence. No talking, no pushing, no testing boundaries. They hung up backpacks on numbered hooks and sat at assigned desks without a sound. Their hands folded on their desks, eyes forward, waiting. "Good morning, class," I said. "Good morning, Mr. Chen." They responded in perfect unison. I'd never heard kids speak in unison like that without specific training. Military schools, maybe. But this was supposed to be a regular elementary school in rural Oregon. The morning went too smoothly. During math, nobody asked for help, even when I could see they were struggling. During reading, nobody whispered or passed notes. When I announced recess, they stood and walked to the door in a single file line without being asked. Outside was worse. Other classes were playing normally, running, shouting, being kids. But my students stood in assigned spots on the blacktop like chess pieces. They didn't play. They just stood there, occasionally speaking quietly to whoever was next to them. "Don't you want to play?" I asked a girl named Emma. She looked confused, almost frightened. "We're not supposed to leave our spots, Mr. Chen." "Says who?" Her eyes darted toward the school building. "The rules." I tried encouraging them to play, but they seemed genuinely terrified of moving from their designated areas. After exactly 20 minutes, they lined up again, without any signal I could detect. Back in the classroom, I started noticing other things. Students asked permission for everything: to pick up dropped pencils, to turn pages in their books, to shift position in their chairs. During lunch, they ate in complete silence, chewing carefully, never making a mess. When someone coughed, they raised their hand and apologized. It was like they were afraid of being children. On my third day, I noticed the scars. Small, precise marks on their arms and necks. Too clean for playground accidents. When I asked Emma about a fresh bandage on her wrist, she recited an answer that sounded rehearsed. "I fell off my bike. I'm clumsy." "How many of you have gotten hurt recently?" Almost every hand went up. That afternoon, the school nurse came to collect students for daily health checks. Mrs. Kim was severe-looking, wore latex gloves constantly, and carried a metal briefcase that looked more like a toolbox than medical supplies. She took 5 students, including Emma. They were gone for almost an hour. When they returned, they looked drained, pale. Each had a small band-aid on their arm in exactly the same spot. I called my friend Sarah that evening. She worked for another Oregon district. "Daily blood draws?" she said. "David, that's not just unusual. That's illegal without parental consent and medical justification. The principal says it's for genetic health monitoring." "Genetic health monitoring for what?" "That's not a thing, David. Not in public schools." That weekend, I researched AgriCorp, agricultural chemical company, moved to Hermiston about 10 years ago. Employed most of the town. Their website talked about innovative solutions and breakthrough crop protection technology. But buried in the SEC filings were mentions of ongoing research into biological applications and expanded testing protocols. I also found 3 EPA violations, a lawsuit from former employees claiming safety violations, and news articles about mysterious illness clusters in other towns where AgriCorp had facilities. Monday morning, I started documenting everything. I timed the nurse visits, photographed the medical equipment I could see, and paid attention to the children's symptoms. Several had developed tremors. 2 kids had started wearing thick glasses, even though their vision had been fine the week before. Marcus kept rubbing his temples and squinting, like everything was too bright. During lunch, I overheard 2 teachers talking in the break room. "The test results came back elevated again," one whispered. "How elevated?" "Dangerously elevated. They're increasing the monitoring frequency." When they saw me, they stopped talking immediately. That afternoon, I followed Mrs. Kim after she finished with my students. Through the health office window, I watched her label blood vials with numbers instead of names. She placed them in a special refrigerator marked with an AgriCorp logo. These children weren't receiving health care. They were providing research data. I started taking pictures with my phone, documenting everything I could access. The blood drawing setup, the AgriCorp equipment, student files that showed unexplained test results. I also started keeping detailed notes about behavioral changes and physical symptoms. Thursday, Emma wasn't herself. She was pale and kept pressing her palms against her temples. "Emma, are you okay?" "My head hurts. It hurts all the time now." She looked around to make sure no one was listening, since the test started getting bigger. "What do you mean, bigger?" Fear flashed across her face. "I'm not supposed to talk about the tests." "Emma, what tests?" But she just shook her head and wouldn't say anything else. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those 26 kids, too scared to be children, standing in assigned spots during recess like experimental subjects in holding patterns. I thought about Miss Patterson, who supposedly died of a heart attack at 34 with no prior health problems. Friday afternoon, I stayed late and broke into Mrs. Kim's office. I found medical files for all the students going back 2 years. The test results showed progressively rising levels of industrial chemicals in their blood. Compounds I'd never heard of, with names like experimental designations, AgCorp 47, AgCorp 52, AgCorp 61. There were also emails between Mrs. Kim and AgriCorp scientists. They didn't call the children by name, they were subjects. The emails discussed exposure levels, behavioral modification, and cognitive development tracking. One email made my hands shake. Asterisk. Subject response to AgCorp 61 remains within acceptable parameters. Recommend increasing dosage for batch 7 subjects to determine upper tolerance threshold. Side effects minimal and consistent with projections. Asterisk. They were poisoning these children systematically. Documenting the effects. Adjusting dosages based on how much the kids could tolerate before showing obvious symptoms. I photographed everything, then locked the office and left. But as I walked to my car, I noticed a black sedan parked across the street. It followed me home, staying exactly 3 cars back. Monday morning, Mrs. Rodriguez called me into her office before school started. Mr. Chen, we've received reports about your behavior. What kind of reports? Accessing areas without permission. Asking inappropriate questions. Her voice was cold now, professional. Your employment here is temporary. I suggest you focus on teaching and avoid said complications. That day, I noticed new security cameras in the hallways. The electronic locks started clicking more frequently, and I realized they were tracking every movement through the building. During lunch, I saw the black sedan parked outside the school. But I couldn't stop. Those children were dying slowly, and their parents didn't even know. I started secretly collecting evidence during normal classroom activities, helping with paper cuts that let me see injection sites, documenting behavioral changes, copying more files when I could access them. Wednesday night, I mailed everything to the EPA, CDC, and an investigative reporter at the Oregonian. Detailed documentation, photos, medical records. A complete picture of systematic human experimentation on children. Friday morning, Mrs. Rodriguez fired me. Your services are no longer needed, she said. Security will escort you out. As I cleaned out my desk, I could see men in suits checking every room, looking for missing files. They were sanitizing the crime scene. I left through the back door during fire drill and drove straight to Portland without stopping. 3 hours later, I was sitting in a federal building talking to EPA investigators who looked sick as they read my documentation. The raid happened 2 weeks later. They found laboratories full of experimental chemicals, detailed records of human testing spanning 10 years, and medical data on over 400 children. AgriCorp had been dosing the local water supply and food sources with experimental pesticides, using the school as a monitoring station to track developmental effects. Miss Patterson hadn't died of a heart attack. The autopsy showed she'd been poisoned with one of AgriCorp's experimental compounds after threatening to expose the 20-through-5 program. But here's the thing that still keeps me awake. The program had been running for 10 years. 10 years of systematic poisoning. How many children had been affected? How many families never knew their kids were being used as test subjects? How many other towns have AgriCorp facilities? The executives were convicted, but most of the children suffered permanent damage. Neurological problems, learning disabilities, immune disorders that will affect them for life. Emma developed early onset dementia at 15. Marcus went blind in one eye. 6 children from my class died before their 18th birthdays. I testified in congressional hearings, helped write new regulations, became an advocate for stronger protections. But I've never felt safe since. Death threats from people who lost jobs when AgriCorp shut down. 3 attempts on my life that I can prove. Probably more I don't know about. I've moved 6 times, changed my name twice, and I still check my rearview mirror, obsessively. The worst part? I found out AgriCorp has facilities in 14 states. 14. And most of them are in small towns just like Hermiston, where the company employs most of the adults and controls the local government. I'm still teaching at a private school in Washington state where I can control who has access to my students. But sometimes I wake up at night wondering, how many more schools are out there with 2 obedient children and daily health checks? How many more teachers have noticed something wrong but convinced themselves they were imagining things? If you're an educator and something feels wrong in your school, trust that instinct. Dig deeper. Document everything. Because the price of staying silent isn't just your job or your safety, it's the lives of children who trust you to protect them. And if you ever see a classroom full of kids who are too quiet, too scared to be children, too afraid to leave their assigned spots during recess, H-Teen-C, ask. 1 questions, take pictures, make phone calls. Because somewhere in a corporate boardroom, someone is tracking their responses and adjusting the dosage. My name is Rachel Martinez, and I've been working the night shift at gas stations for 5 years now. I started when I was 18, right after high school, just looking for quick cash. But gas station work at night, it gets into your blood. You learn to read people in 30 seconds or less. You know who's going to cause trouble, who's just tired from driving, and who's running from something they don't want to talk about. I've handled armed robberies, drunk drivers trying to buy more beer, and tweakers looking for easy money. Nothing really scared me anymore. At least, that's what I thought before I took the job at Desert Stop in Fossil, Oregon. Fossil isn't even a real town anymore. Population 473, and half of those are probably dead, but nobody bothered to update the sign. It sits right on Highway 218, the kind of road that connects nowhere to nowhere else. Most people driving through are lost, low on gas, or trying to avoid the main highways for reasons they keep to themselves. The Desert Stop is the only gas station for 60 miles in any direction. It's one of those old places with 4 pumps, fluorescent lights that buzz all night, and a convenience store smaller than most people's bedrooms. The owner, Mr. Chen, lives 3 hours away in Bend and only shows up twice a month to restock and check the register. The rest of the time, it's just me from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. every night except Sundays. I was saving every penny to move to Portland. Had almost $4,000 hidden in my bedroom back home, which was enough for first month's rent and a security deposit somewhere decent. I figured 6 more months of night shifts and I'd be out of this desert wasteland forever. The weird customers started showing up in late September. At first, I thought they were just tired truckers or people who'd been driving all day. You know how some people get when they've been on the road too long. They move slow, don't make eye contact, just want to get their stuff and go. But these customers were different. They all moved the same way, like they were underwater or walking through thick mud. They'd come in around 2 or 3 a.m., always alone, always paying cash. They never spoke except to grunt when I told them their total. And they never, ever looked directly at me. At first, it was maybe 1 person a week, then 2 or 3. By October, I was seeing them almost every night. They all bought the same things, beef jerky and energy drinks. Not the good jerky either, the cheap stuff that tastes like cardboard and salt. They'd grab 2 or 3 packages, along with a couple of those energy drinks that are mostly caffeine and sugar. Never anything else. Never cigarettes, never lottery tickets, never asked where the bathroom was. The strangest part was what they did after they bought their stuff. Instead of driving away, they'd sit in their cars right outside the store and eat everything immediately. I could see them through the dive flat the store, big windows, tearing into the jerky like they hadn't eaten in weeks. They'd down the entire energy drink in one go, then just sit there for 10 or 15 minutes before driving off. I started paying more attention to them after the 3rd week. Their skin looked wrong, too pale, stretched tight over their faces like it didn't quite fit. When car headlights hit them just right, their eyes reflected the light back like a cat's or a deer's. But people's eyes don't do that. One night in early November, I was restocking the candy rack when a man walked in who looked familiar. Really familiar. I couldn't place where I'd seen him until he walked up to the jerky display, and I got a good look at his profile. His picture had been on a missing person poster at the post office for 3 months. David Rodriguez, 34, disappeared while driving from Spokane to Sacramento. Last seen at a gas station in John Day, about 80 miles north of here. The poster said he was driving a blue Honda Civic with Washington plates. This guy was wearing the same clothes as in the poster, a red flannel shirt and jeans. He bought his usual jerky and energy drinks, paid with exact change, and walked out without saying a word. His car was a blue Honda Civic with Washington plates. I tried to talk to him when he came in. "Excuse me, sir, are you David Rodriguez?" He stopped and looked at me, but his eyes were completely blank, like nobody was home behind them. He opened his mouth like he was going to say something, then closed it and shook his head slowly. He seemed confused, like he was trying to remember something important but couldn't quite reach it. "David?" I said again. For just a second, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. But then it was gone, and he walked out to his car to eat his jerky in the parking lot. I called the sheriff's department the next morning, but the phone just rang and rang. Finally, a recording came on saying the office was temporarily closed due to budget cuts. If I had an emergency, I should call the state police. The state police told me Fossil was outside their regular patrol area, and unless someone was in immediate danger, they couldn't send a unit out to check on a possible missing person sighting. They said I should call the local sheriff. I looked it up online and found out the whole county had lost its law enforcement funding 6 months ago. We didn't have a sheriff anymore. No deputies, no police, nothing. If something bad happened in Fossil, you were on your own. That's when I started researching the missing people I thought I recognized. David Rodriguez was just the first. Over the next 2 weeks, I saw at least 4 other people whose faces I remembered from missing person posters or Facebook shares. Jennifer Walsh from Idaho, missing for 2 months. Marcus Thompson from Nevada, gone since August. An older woman named Betty Carson, who disappeared from a rest stop in Utah. They all moved the same way. They all bought the same things. They all ate like they were starving, then drove away into the dark. I found an online forum called Strange Encounters Pacific Northwest, where people shared stories about weird stuff happening in rural areas. There was a whole thread about something called changed people, travelers who went missing for weeks or months, then turned up acting different. According to the forum, these people would return to their families or jobs with no memory of where they'd been. But they weren't the same. Family members said they seemed distant, confused. They'd forget things they should remember, like their children's names or their own phone numbers. But they could remember things they shouldn't know, like details about places they'd never been. The forum had dozens of reports from eastern Oregon, Nevada, and Utah, all remote desert areas, all places where people had reported UFO sightings or strange lights in the sky. One post really caught my attention. A woman in Nevada said her husband came back after being missing for 6 weeks. He seemed normal at first, but then she noticed he was getting up at exactly 3 a.m. every night and standing in their backyard, staring at the sky. When she asked him about it, he said he didn't remember doing it. But she started staying awake to watch him, and he did it every single night for 2 months. Then one night, he left the house at 3 a.m. and never came back. I decided to set up a camera. I had an old webcam I'd been using for video calls with my sister in Seattle, so I hid it behind the energy drink display, where it could see most of the store and part of the parking lot. The footage I got made my skin crawl. The weird customers didn't just move strangely, they moved in sync. When one person was in the store, they'd walk to the jerky display at a normal pace. But when 2 or 3 came in at the same time, they moved in perfect coordination. They'd turn their heads the same direction at the same time. They'd reach for products with identical movements. They'd walk to the counter in the exact same rhythm. And they always arrived at the same time as other cars, even when they were coming from different directions. I could see headlights approaching from the north and south simultaneously, and the cars would pull up to the pumps within seconds of each other. I also noticed something else on the camera footage. None of these people ever used the bathroom. They'd buy energy drinks, down them in the parking lot, then drive away. Normal people would need to pee after drinking 16 ounces of liquid, especially on a long drive. But not these customers. The cars bothered me too. At first, I thought it was a coincidence that so many of them drove similar vehicles. But when I started paying closer attention, I realized they were all driving the exact same make and model, just with different license plates from different states. Blue Honda Civics. Every single one. I started writing down license plate numbers and looked them up online. Every plate I checked belonged to a missing person. One night in late November, I decided to follow one of them. A woman had come in around 2:30 a.m., bought her jerky and energy drinks, and was sitting in her car eating. Instead of staying inside the store, I locked up and got in my own car. When she pulled out of the parking lot, I followed her with my headlights off. She turned east on Highway 218 toward the mountains. The road got narrower and more winding as we climbed higher into the desert hills. After about 20 minutes, she turned onto a dirt road I'd never noticed before. I followed at a distance, using moonlight to navigate. The road led to a flat area surrounded by low hills, the kind of place where the military used to test things they didn't want people to see. The woman's car stopped in the middle of the flat area. She got out and just stood there, facing the sky. That's when the lights appeared. 3 bright lights in a triangular formation, moving slowly across the sky from the north. They were completely silent. No engine noise, no wind sound, nothing. Just 3 points of light getting bigger and brighter as they approached. The woman didn't move. She stood perfectly still as the lights descended toward her. When they were maybe 100 feet above the ground, a beam of light shot down from the center of the triangle and engulfed her completely. For about 5 minutes, I couldn't see anything except the beam of light. It was so bright it hurt to look at, even from a quarter-mile away. Then the light disappeared, the 3 points moved back up into the sky, and everything was dark again. The woman got back in her car and drove away like nothing had happened. I sat there in my car for another hour, trying to process what I'd seen. When I finally drove back to the gas station, it was almost 5 a.m. I had about an hour left on my shift, and I spent it staring at the security camera footage, trying to convince myself I hadn't hallucinated the whole thing. But the timestamp showed I'd been gone for exactly 2 hours and 43 minutes. Over the next week, I discovered surveillance equipment hidden throughout the store that I'd never noticed before. Tiny cameras in the ceiling tiles, microphones smaller than coins stuck behind product displays, and some kind of electronic device attached to the cash register that definitely wasn't there when I started working. The equipment didn't look like anything I'd ever seen. It was too small, too advanced. The cameras didn't have any brand names or model numbers, and the materials looked more like ceramic than plastic. I realized I'd been recorded and monitored every night for months. Everything I did, everything I said, even the faces I made when I thought nobody was watching. Someone or something had been studying me this entire time. That's when I decided to leave Fossil. I didn't care about the money I still needed to save. I didn't care about giving Mr. Chen notice. I was done. I finished my shift that Friday morning and drove home to pack. I threw everything I owned into 2 suitcases, grabbed my savings from the hiding spot under my mattress, and loaded my car. I was going to drive straight to Portland and figure out the rest later. I made it exactly to the city limits sign before my car died. The engine just stopped. No warning, no strange noises, nothing wrong with the gas gauge or temperature. 1 second I was driving, the next second I was coasting to a stop at the side of the road. I tried restarting the car, but it wouldn't even turn over. I checked under the hood, but I don't know much about engines. Everything looked normal to me. That's when I saw the lights in my rearview mirror. 3 bright points in a triangular formation, approaching from the direction of town. I got out of my car and started running toward the highway, but my legs felt heavy and slow, like I was moving through water. The lights got brighter and brighter until I couldn't see anything else. Then, everything went black. I woke up behind the counter at Desert Stop. According to the clock, it was 3:47 a.m. My car was in the parking lot with the keys in my pocket. I had no memory of driving back to work or unlocking the store. When I looked in the bathroom mirror, something was different about my reflection. I couldn't put my finger on what exactly, but my face looked slightly wrong. Like someone had tried to copy a photograph of me, but got the proportions just a little bit off. My coworker Janet mentioned it when she came in for the morning shift. "You look different," she said. "Did you get your hair cut or something?" But I couldn't explain what had changed, and neither could she. That was 3 months ago. I'm still working the night shift at Desert Stop. I still serve the strange customers who buy jerky and energy drinks, and I understand now that they're not customers at all. They're monitors, just like me. We're watching for something. I don't know what yet, but I can feel it coming. Every night at 3 a.m., I step outside and look at the sky, and sometimes I can see lights moving between the stars. I know they'll be back for me soon, and next time, I won't be coming back to Fossil at all. If you're ever driving through Eastern Oregon late at night and you need gas, Maybe choose a different route. Some places are too isolated, too far from help. And some jobs change you in ways you never expected. I thought I was saving money to start a new life in Portland. Turns out, I was being prepared for a completely different kind of life altogether. One that doesn't happen on Earth. My name is Marcus Chen, and I've been working in radio for 8 years. I started as an intern at a college station in Portland, then worked my way up through small markets across Oregon. For the past 3 years, I've been the overnight DJ at KBND 1110 AM here in Bend. It's not glamorous work, playing classic rock and taking calls from insomniacs between midnight and 6 AM, but I love radio. There's something magical about sending your voice out into the darkness, knowing someone out there is listening. I've handled drunk callers, conspiracy theorists, and lonely people who just need someone to talk to. Nothing really surprised me anymore. But what started happening in late September changed everything I thought I knew about my job, my town, and what might be living beneath our feet. The KBND studio sits in a converted house on the east side of Bend, about 2 miles from downtown. It's a cramped space with wood paneling from the 70s and equipment that should have been replaced a decade ago. The main board is an old Wheatstone with about half the channel faders held together with electrical tape. My microphone is a trusty Electro Voice RE20 that's probably older than I am, but it still sounds great. The overnight shift is usually just me and our ancient transmitter that sits in a shack out back. The building creaks and settles all night, especially when the desert wind picks up. I've got 2 phone lines, one for requests and one for general calls. Most nights I might get 10 calls total. People wanting to hear Lynyrd Skynyrd or complaining about their neighbors. Sometimes truck drivers passing through on Highway 97 call just to hear a friendly voice. My routine is pretty simple. Play 4 songs, give the weather and time, maybe take a call if the phones light up. I've got a coffee maker that gurgles all night and a space heater that barely works when winter hits the high desert. The nearest 24-hour anything is a gas station 3 miles away. When something goes wrong, I'm on my own until morning. It was a Tuesday night in late September when I first heard from him. I'd just finished playing some Creedence and was about to give the 2 AM weather when line 1 lit up. KBND, you're on the air, I said. The voice that came through was wrong from the start. It sounded like someone talking through water, all distorted and bubbly. The words were clear enough, but there was this weird echo, like the person was calling from inside a tunnel. "Good evening, Marcus," the voice said. "Beautiful night for broadcasting. Thanks for calling. Got a request? I just wanted to let you know how much I enjoy your show. I listen every night from down below." The line went dead. I figured it was some kid with a voice changer app, maybe calling from his basement. We get prank calls sometimes. But something about it bothered me. The voice had this wet, hollow quality that didn't sound electronic. And he'd used my name, which isn't that weird since I say it on air, but most callers just say, "Hey DJ," or nothing at all. The calls started coming every few nights after that. Always the same distorted voice, always claiming to be broadcasting from beneath the town. I'd ask where exactly he meant, but he'd just chuckle. This gurgling sound that made my skin crawl, and change the subject. "Tell me about your other callers, Marcus," he said one night. "The woman who called about her cat. Sarah, wasn't it?" That stopped me cold. Sarah had called maybe 20 minutes earlier, but she'd only given her first name. She was worried about her missing cat and asked me to mention it on air. "How do you know her name?" I asked. "I know lots of things about your listeners. Sarah lives on Hawthorne Street. The orange tabby she's looking for is named Chester. He's been hiding under the Miller's deck 2 houses down." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Who is this? How do you know that?" But the line was already dead. The next morning, I looked up Sarah's number in our call log and called her back. Chester had come home that morning, she said. She'd found him exactly where the mystery caller said he'd be. That's when I started paying closer attention to the calls. Over the next few weeks, the pattern became clear. The distorted voice would call after other people had been on the air, and he'd know things about them that he shouldn't. Personal details that went way beyond what they'd shared on the radio. When Tom called from the night shift at Street Charles Hospital to request some Metallica, the mystery caller phoned in an hour later to ask how Tom's divorce was going and whether his wife had served him papers yet. When Janet called from her insomnia to chat about the weather, he knew she'd been taking sleeping pills her doctor hadn't prescribed. I started keeping notes. Every time he called, I'd write down what he claimed to know. Then I'd try to verify it later. The details were always accurate. Always. "Marcus," he said during a call in mid-October, "you should tell your listeners to avoid Pine Street tonight. There's going to be an accident at the intersection with Wilson." "What kind of accident?" "A blue pickup truck will run the red light around 3:30. The driver's been drinking at the Baldy's barbecue. He'll hit a Honda Civic." I didn't know what to do with that information. Call the police? They'd think I was crazy. But I stayed late that night, monitoring the emergency scanner I keep in the studio. Sure enough, at 3:47 a.m., units were dispatched to Pine and Wilson for a vehicle collision involving a blue pickup and a Honda. 2 people were hurt, but not seriously. Still, the fact that this caller had predicted it shook me to my core. I called the non-emergency line the next day and tried to explain what had happened, but the dispatcher just took my name and said they'd look into it. Nobody ever called me back. The calls kept coming, and they kept getting more specific. He'd describe arguments happening in houses across town, tell me about affairs and family secrets, warn about minor crimes before they happened. It was like he had surveillance on the entire city. "How are you seeing all this?" I finally asked him directly. "I told you, Marcus. I broadcast from below. There are tunnels under all of Bend. Old lava tubes, mining passages, storm drains. They connect everything: houses, businesses, schools. You'd be amazed what you can see and hear when you know where to look." "That's impossible. Someone would know about tunnels like that." "Would they?" People see what they expect to see. A grate in their basement floor, a drain in their driveway. They don't think about where those passages lead. I started researching Bend's history during my off hours. The high desert has a complex geological past. Volcanic activity created miles of lava tubes throughout the region. Some are tourist attractions, but others were never fully mapped. I found references to early mining operations that dug extensive tunnels before being abandoned. Most of the records were incomplete or lost. Then there were the storm drain systems, built as the town expanded in the 80s and 90s. City planning documents showed a network of concrete passages designed to handle flash floods, but the maps I could access seemed incomplete. Whole sections were marked as contractor specifications unavailable, or as-built drawings not filed. But it was more than just tunnels. The caller started describing things that made my blood run cold. "They've been here longer than humans, Marcus, much longer. When your people came to the high desert, these beings were already well established in the underground. They learned to coexist, to stay hidden. But they've been watching, learning about surface culture. They, pale things with large eyes, adapted for life in darkness. They move through the tunnels like water, quiet and quick. For decades, they've observed human behavior through basement windows, through storm drains, through the gaps where pipes enter buildings." I tried to laugh it off, but listeners had started calling in with their own stories. People reported strange sounds in their basements, scratching, whispering, movement behind walls. A few claimed to have seen eyes watching them from storm drains or sewer grates. One woman swore something had been living in her crawl space, leaving behind scraps of food and what looked like shed skin. Most of these callers sounded genuinely frightened. These weren't prank calls or people looking for attention. They were scared neighbors reporting things they couldn't explain. "Your radio signal reaches deep into the tunnel network," the mystery caller explained during a late November call. "The AM frequency penetrates far underground. For years, they've been listening to your broadcasts, learning human language and customs, understanding how surface people think and behave." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because some of them are getting restless. They want to expand their territory, move to the surface. And they've learned enough about humans to know how to blend in." That's when I noticed people were going missing. Not many, maybe one person every few weeks. But the pattern was consistent. They'd disappear near storm drains or after investigating strange sounds in their basements. The police treated them as routine missing persons cases. Adults had the right to leave town without telling anyone, they said. But I started tracking the disappearances, cross-referencing them with my listener calls. Several of the missing people had phoned my show to report underground sounds or strange sightings. They'd vanished within days of making those calls. "Marcus," the caller said in early December, "some of the beings below are becoming hostile toward surface dwellers. They see humans as invaders in territory they've claimed for centuries. The peaceful coexistence is ending. What do you want from me? I want to offer you a choice. Join us willingly, and you'll be treated well." Several surface people have already made this decision. They live comfortably in the tunnels now, helping us understand human society. The missing people? Some of them. Others resisted. The beings below don't like resistance. My hands were shaking as I tried to stay on the air normally. I played music, gave weather updates, acted like everything was fine. But during commercial breaks, I was frantically trying to figure out what to do. Call the FBI? The state police? Who would believe any of this? "I need time to think," I told the caller. "Time is running short, Marcus. Your broadcasts have served their purpose. The beings below have learned what they need to know about human behavior. Soon, they'll begin expanding to the surface permanently." "When?" "Very soon. Tonight, perhaps, or tomorrow, but soon." The line went dead, and I sat alone in the studio, staring at the silent phone. Outside, Bend looked normal. Street lights, empty roads, the occasional car passing by. But now I imagined pale figures moving through tunnels beneath every building, watching and waiting. I tried to shut down the broadcast system when my shift ended at 6 a.m., but something was wrong. The equipment wouldn't respond to the controls. The transmitter kept running even when I switched off the main power. The signal continued broadcasting dead air. That's when I realized they had control of more than just tunnels. The electrical systems, the phone lines, maybe the entire infrastructure of Bend was compromised. How long had they been learning about our technology? How long had they been preparing? I called my program director from my cell phone, but the call wouldn't go through. The landlines in the studio were dead except for incoming calls. When the phone rang, I knew who it would be. "You can't stop the broadcast, Marcus. We need the signal for coordination. Tonight is when everything changes." "What's happening tonight?" "Expansion. The surface becomes part of our territory. Humans will learn to coexist with their new neighbors, or they'll join the missing." Through the studio window, I could see the first storm drain covers starting to move. Pale hands pushed them aside from below. Then, more covers, manhole covers, basement grates throughout the neighborhood. Dozens of them, all lifting at once. The beings that emerged looked almost human at first glance, but wrong in every detail. Too tall, too thin, skin like wet paper. Their eyes were huge and completely black, adapted for absolute darkness. They moved with fluid, unnatural grace, like they were swimming through air. I grabbed the microphone and started broadcasting warnings, telling anyone listening to get out of Bend immediately. But even as I spoke, I could see the creatures spreading through the streets, moving toward houses and businesses with clear purpose. Some carried struggling figures, people they'd taken from basements and storm drains. Others seemed to be marking territory, leaving symbols on buildings that looked like they'd been carved with claws. I barricaded the studio door and kept broadcasting. Through the night, I described what I could see happening to my town. The creatures working together to drag people underground. The lights going out building by building as they took control of the electrical grid. The emergency services radio falling silent as dispatch centers were overrun. By morning, Bend was a ghost town. Empty cars sat in driveways, front doors hung open, but the tunnels below pulsed with new activity. I'm still broadcasting because they let me. They want the surface world to know what happened here, to understand that coexistence is possible for those willing to adapt. My voice reaches beyond Bend now, across Oregon and into neighboring states. If you're listening to this, stay away from storm drains. Check your basements for sounds that shouldn't be there. And remember, they've been listening to radio broadcasts for years. They're learning about your town too. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and I need you to understand that what I'm about to tell you isn't a story. It's a confession, a warning, a desperate attempt to save whatever children might still be saved before the thing spreading through Oregon's small towns claims them all. I was a pediatric psychologist for 12 years before I came to Crater Lake. I'd worked with traumatized children, abuse victims, kids who'd seen things no child should ever see. I thought I understood the full spectrum of childhood trauma. I was wrong, dead wrong. And my arrogance, my absolute certainty that I could help anyone, led directly to the deaths of 17 children and the transformation of countless others. Crater Lake, Oregon, population 847. Nestled in the shadow of the caldera like a tumor feeding off something ancient and malevolent. The town exists primarily to service tourists visiting the national park. But the locals have a saying, the lake gives and the lake takes. I thought it was primarily to salve it, just colorful folklore, until I learned what the lake had been taking for the past 70 years. Children. Specifically, their capacity for joy, wonder, and innocence. Leaving behind hollow shells that looked like kids but felt wrong in ways that made adults physically ill to be around them. I came to Crater Lake in September 2023 because the school district was desperate. They'd had 5 child psychologists quit in 2 years, and the children's behavioral problems were getting worse. Violent outbursts, disturbing artwork, an epidemic of night terrors that left kids screaming about the blue lady who lives under the water. The school board offered me triple my usual consulting fee to spend a semester evaluating their students. The first thing I noticed was how quiet the children were. Not shy or withdrawn, hollow. They sat in their classrooms like little mannequins, going through the motions of childhood without any of the energy that should radiate from healthy kids. When they spoke, their voices had this strange monotone quality, like they were reading from scripts they didn't understand. But the most disturbing thing was their artwork. Every single child, from kindergarten through 6th grade, drew the same thing. A woman in a blue dress standing in dark water, her arms reaching upward. The details varied. Some kids gave her long black hair, others made her face a blur of shadow. But the core image was identical across dozens of different children. When I asked them about their drawings, they'd just stare at me with those flat, empty eyes and say, "She's waiting for us." No emotion, no fear, no curiosity about why this figure dominated their imagination. Just matter of fact, acceptance that some blue lady under the water was an important part of their lives. The school's principal, Martha Hendricks, had been working with these children for 15 years. The gradual change had been so slow that she'd almost stopped noticing it. But when I pressed her for details, the timeline became clear. It started in the summer of 1953. Right after a family of 5 drowned in Crater Lake during what should have been a routine fishing trip. The Kowalski family, Martha explained, her hands shaking as she poured coffee in her office. Polish immigrants who'd been coming to the lake every summer for years. The parents were experienced swimmers, the children had life jackets. But something went wrong that day. Park rangers found their boat capsized near the center of the lake, but the bodies. She paused, staring out the window at the distant water. They found them 3 weeks later, all 5 of them, standing upright on the lake bottom in perfect formation, like they were posing for a family photo. The official cause of death was drowning, but the autopsy reports noted several disturbing anomalies. The victims' lungs were filled with lake water that had somehow been supercharged with minerals not found anywhere else in the mineral ecosystem. Their skin had taken on a bluish tint that persisted even after death. And most disturbing of all, their eyes had turned completely black, as if their pupils had expanded to consume the entire eyeball. That's when the children started changing, Martha continued. Not all at once, but gradually. Kids who'd been bright and energetic became listless and strange. They'd wander toward the lake during recess, and we'd have to physically stop them from walking into the water. They started having the same nightmares, drawing the same pictures, saying the same things about the blue lady. I asked to see the psychological evaluations from previous years, but Martha's expression grew even more troubled. Every psychologist we've hired has concluded that the children are suffering from some kind of mass hysteria or shared delusion. They recommend therapy, medication, removing the children from the toxic environment of the town. But the thing is, Dr. Chen, the children who leave don't get better, they get worse. She pulled out a thick file folder labeled Transfer Students, follow-up reports. Inside were psychological evaluations, medical records, and incident reports spanning 7 decades. Children who'd been moved to Portland, Salem, even out of state showed the same pattern. Increasing detachment from reality, violent episodes triggered by exposure to large bodies of water, and an obsessive need to return to Crater Lake. Tommy Morrison moved to Seattle with his family in 1978, Martha said, pointing to one particularly thick file. 6 months later, he disappeared from his bedroom in the middle of the night. Search teams found him 3 days later, standing waist-deep in Lake Washington, completely catatonic. When they pulled him out, he kept repeating, "She needs me to come home," over and over. The most chilling case involved a girl named Lisa Chen, no relation to me, despite the shared surname. Her family had relocated to Phoenix, Arizona, about as far from water as you could get. Lisa seemed to be improving until her parents took her to a public swimming pool. The moment she saw the blue water, she'd had what witnesses described as a complete psychotic break, screaming that the blue lady was angry and was going to punish everyone. She'd tried to drown 3 other children before pool security could restrain her. "She's at Oregon State Hospital now," Martha said quietly. "Has been for 12 years, catatonic most of the time, but when she does speak, it's always about returning to the lake, about finishing what she started." I should have left that first week. Every instinct I'd developed over years of working with disturbed children was screaming that something was fundamentally wrong in Crater Lake. But I was arrogant. I believed that modern psychology and proper therapeutic techniques could solve anything. I thought I could save these children where others had failed. My first breakthrough came with a 7-year-old named Emma Rodriguez. Unlike the other children, Emma still showed flickers of normal emotional response. When I asked her about the blue lady, she looked around nervously and whispered, "I'm not supposed to talk about her when other kids are around." During a private session, Emma drew the familiar figure, but added details the other children never included. The blue lady was surrounded by other figures, smaller ones that Emma identified as the children who went swimming. When I asked what happened to these children, Emma's crayon snapped in her small fist. "They have to stay with her forever," Emma said, her voice barely audible. "They have to help her collect more friends, but they don't want to. They cry all the time, but no sound comes out because they're underwater." Emma's drawing showed something that made my blood freeze. The small figures around the blue lady weren't just standing in the water. They were chained together with what looked like lake weeds, their mouths open in silent screams. And at the edge of the picture, barely visible, were more figures walking down from the shore. Children from the town, their eyes black and empty, marching voluntarily into the water to join the collection. "How do you know all this, Emma?" She looked up at me with eyes that held far too much knowledge for a 7-year-old. "Because she shows us. Every night. In our dreams. She shows us what it's like down there. And she tells us we'll understand everything once we join her family." That night, I drove to Crater Lake and stood at the shore, trying to make sense of what I'd learned. The water was impossibly blue, deeper than any lake had a right to be, and unnaturally still despite the wind that rippled every other body of water in Oregon. As I watched, something moved far below the surface, a pale shape that might have been a swimmer or might have been something else entirely. I was about to leave when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Dozens of small objects along the shoreline that I'd initially mistaken for rocks were actually children's toys. A teddy bear here, a plastic truck there, all of them bleached white by sun and water but arranged in neat rows like offerings to some hungry god. The next morning, I called in sick and spent the day at the local library, researching the lake's history. What I found in the old newspaper archives should have sent me running straight back to Portland. The drownings hadn't started with the Kowalski family. They'd been happening for decades, maybe centuries. Indigenous tribes in the area had legends about Crater Lake being the home of a jealous water spirit who demanded tribute. Early white settlers reported children who would sleepwalk to the lake's edge and had to be physically restrained from entering the water. But the most disturbing discovery was a pattern in the drowning reports. Every 7 years, like clockwork, multiple children would die in the lake during the same weekend. The deaths were always ruled accidental, but the details were eerily similar. Children who were strong swimmers suddenly developing cramps, families whose boats would inexplicably capsize in calm weather, hiking groups where one child would simply walk into the water despite frantic efforts to stop them. The last major incident had been in 2016, 7 children dead over a 3-day period, which meant, according to the pattern, the next collection was due in 2023. This year, I raced back to the school, my mind reeling with the implications. If I was right, if there really was some kind of supernatural entity in the lake operating on a 7-year cycle, then the children I'd been treating weren't just psychologically disturbed. They were being prepared, groomed, their personalities slowly erased to make room for something else. But when I arrived at the school, I found it empty except for Martha, who was sitting in her office, staring at a piece of paper with tears streaming down her face. "They're gone," she whispered. "All of them." Every single child walked out during lunch period. The teachers tried to stop them, but she handed me the paper. It was a note written in crayon, but the handwriting was too perfect, too mature for any child to have produced. Asterisk, the collection is ready. The Blue Lady is pleased with this year's offerings. Do not follow us to the water. Do not try to save us. We go willingly to join our eternal family. Asterisk. I grabbed Martha's keys and drove to the lake faster than I'd ever driven in my life, praying I wasn't too late. But when I reached the shore, I saw them. 43 children walking in perfect formation into the impossibly blue water. Their movements were synchronized, robotic, like they were being controlled by a single consciousness. Emma Rodriguez was near the front of the group. When she saw me, she turned and smiled. But it wasn't her smile. It was something older, hungrier, wearing her face like a mask. "Dr. Chen," she called out, her voice carrying impossibly well across the water. "Thank you for trying to help us. But we don't need help anymore. We've found our real family." The water was up to their waists now, then their chests, but they kept walking with no sign of fear or struggle. I waded in after them, screaming their names, begging them to come back. But the lake water felt wrong against my skin, too thick, too warm, like swimming in blood. That's when I saw her, the Blue Lady, rising from the depths like a nightmare made manifest. She was tall, impossibly tall, with skin the color of deep water and hair that moved like seaweed in a current that didn't exist. Her dress seemed to be made of the lake itself, shifting and flowing around her impossibly thin form. But her face was made of all the children she'd collected over the decades, features that shifted and changed. Emma's eyes here, Tommy Morrison's nose, Lisa Chen's mouth opening in a silent scream. A patchwork creature wearing the stolen pieces of dead children like jewelry. She looked at me with those shifting, borrowed eyes and spoke in a voice like drowning. "You cannot save them, little doctor. They are mine now, as all the children will be mine. The lake is hungry, and the town feeds it well." The children had disappeared beneath the surface now, but I could see them through the impossibly clear water, standing in neat rows on the lake bottom, their eyes black and empty, their mouths moving in silent screams. And among them, dozens of other children from previous collections, all of them perfectly preserved, all of them trapped in an eternal underwater nightmare. I tried to swim deeper, to reach them, but something grabbed my ankle. Another child, this one so old her clothing had rotted away entirely, her skin blue-white like a corpse. She pulled me down with inhuman strength, and I found myself face to face with what had once been a little girl, but was now something else entirely. "Join us," she whispered, her voice somehow carrying perfectly through the water. "It doesn't hurt after the first few minutes, and you'll never be alone again. Never worry again. Never feel pain again." I kicked free and swam to the surface, choking and gasping, but when I looked back, the children were gone. All of them. The lake was perfectly calm, perfectly blue, perfectly empty, as if nothing had ever happened. The official investigation concluded that 43 children had suffered some kind of mass psychological break and had drowned in a tragic accident. The bodies were never recovered, which authorities attributed to the lake's extreme depth and unique underwater currents. The town was evacuated temporarily, and most families chose never to return. But I know the truth. Those children aren't dead. They're trapped, conscious and aware, forced to spend eternity collecting more victims for the Pamet, thing that controls the lake. And in 7 years, When new families move to Crater Lake seeking a quiet life in a scenic town, their children will start drawing pictures of a blue lady in the water. The cycle will continue. I tried to warn people. I published papers about mass hysteria and environmental factors affecting child psychology. I testified before state committees about the need for better mental health resources in rural communities, but I never told the whole truth, because who would believe it? Instead, I've spent the last year documenting every supernatural incident in Oregon's small towns, hoping to find a pattern, hoping to find a way to stop what happened at Crater Lake from happening anywhere else. What I've discovered is that Oregon is riddled with places like this, towns where the land itself seems hungry for human suffering. Places where things that should have died centuries ago continue to feed on the innocent. This is my warning to anyone reading this. If you're planning to visit Oregon's scenic small towns, research their history first. Look for patterns of unexplained deaths, missing children, families that leave suddenly in the middle of the night. And if you find yourself somewhere that feels wrong, somewhere that makes your skin crawl for no logical reason, trust that instinct. Leave immediately. Don't try to save anyone. Don't try to investigate. Don't let curiosity or professional pride override your survival instincts. Some places can't be saved, only escaped. And whatever you do, don't let your children swim in Crater Lake. The Blue Lady is always waiting, always hungry, and she's had decades to perfect her collection methods. The water is so very blue, and so very deep, and so very patient. My name is Carlos Martinez, and I've been driving delivery trucks for Pacific Northwest Shipping for 12 years. I wish I could tell you that what I'm about to share is fiction, but I have the medical records to prove otherwise. The scars on my hands have finally stopped bleeding, though they still weep a clear fluid the doctors can't identify. What happened in Antelope, Oregon last year didn't just change my life, it changed my DNA. The government sealed the files, paid the survivors, and told us never to speak about it. But people deserve to know the truth about what happened in that cursed town. I've driven every route from Seattle to the California border. Everything from Amazon packages to medical supplies to those weird art installations rich people order online. Rural routes were my specialty because most drivers avoid them. Too much driving, not enough money per mile, and half the time you're delivering to some survivalist living off the grid. But I liked the most drivers' solitude. Just me, the road, and classic rock on the radio. My route covered about 200 miles of central Oregon, hitting tiny towns that bigger companies won't touch. Places like Fossil, Spray, and Mitchell, communities where maybe 50 people still cling to life after the world moved on. These places have a particular smell to them, dust, abandonment, and something else I could never quite identify until Antelope taught me what desperation actually smells like. Antelope sits 40 miles south of the Dalles, right off Highway 97. Most people know it as the town that cult took over in the 1980 seconds, the Rajneeshis. What most people don't know is why they chose that specific location. The land records I've seen since show mineral surveys from the 1970 seconds, indicating unusual electromagnetic properties in the soil. Something about the iron content and underground water systems created natural barriers to electronic signals. Perfect for a cult wanting to stay hidden. Perfect for other things too. After the Rajneeshis got kicked out, the town stayed mostly empty. Official population was 46, but that number never changed, no matter who died or moved away. That should have been my first clue that something was maintaining the population artificially. I made deliveries to Antelope every Wednesday for 3 years. Should have been simple. 5 or 6 packages to scattered addresses, in and out in 20 minutes. But nothing about those deliveries was ever simple. And by the end, nothing about me was simple either. The wrongness started 5 miles out from town. Same spot every time. My GPS would flicker and die, screen going black before showing impossible things, roads that led straight down into the earth, my truck icon driving through solid rock, destination markers floating in empty sky. The radio would catch fragments of broadcasts that couldn't exist. Weather reports from 1962, emergency broadcasts in languages that sounded almost familiar but wrong somehow, like German spoken by something that had learned human speech but never been human itself. My dashboard clock became a kaleidoscope of impossible times: 25 to 73, 8 to 91. Sometimes it would run backwards so fast the numbers blurred, then jump forward by hours in a single second. I started wearing 3 different watches to track time, but they'd all show different hours within minutes of entering that 5-mile dead zone. The first few months, I blamed the electronics on the location. Rural Oregon, mountains blocking signals, maybe some kind of natural magnetic field. But electronics don't just malfunction, they change. My truck's odometer started adding miles I never drove. The fuel gauge would read full after I'd burned half a tank. Most disturbing was the radio picking up conversations from inside sealed buildings, voices discussing things that made my skin crawl even when I couldn't quite make out the words. The people waiting for packages were always outside, always ready, like they'd been watching me approach for hours. They'd be standing in their driveways or on their porches, hands clasped behind their backs, faces pointed toward the road. Not looking down the road, pointed, like their necks had been positioned at the exact angle to track my approach. None of the names on the packages matched the people signing for them. John Smith's package went to an elderly woman with fingers that bent backward at impossible angles. Mary Johnson's delivery was signed for by a man whose pupils were perfect white circles. David Williams never appeared, but a teenager who looked exactly like photos of David Williams from 1987 would take his packages with hands that shook constantly, uncontrollably. The packages themselves felt wrong in ways that made my palms sweat, heavy but not solid, like bags of warm blood that moved when you carried them. The contents would shift and settle, sometimes making soft splashing sounds, sometimes producing tiny tapping noises like fingernails against glass. Recipients handled them like they contained live animals, carefully, fearfully, but with an addiction that made their hands shake with anticipation. After 6 months of these deliveries, I started keeping a journal of the people I saw. Not because I was suspicious yet, but because something in my brain was screaming that I needed to remember, needed to document, needed proof of what was happening, even though I didn't know what was happening. That's when I noticed the aging. Margaret Fawcett at 412 Main Street. First entry, appeared 45 to 50, brown hair with gray streaks, moderate wrinkles, clear speech. 3 months later, appears 65 to 70, completely gray hair, deep facial wrinkles, uses walking stick, voice trembles. 6 months, appears 80 plus, white hair falling out in patches, severe hunching, skin like old paper, can barely hold pen to sign. But then Margaret got young again. Not gradually. Between one Wednesday and the next, she went from ancient and decrepit to maybe 30 years old. Same facial structure, same voice, but smooth skin, bright eyes, thick brown hair. When I asked if she was Margaret's daughter, she just smiled and signed Margaret Fawcett with a hand that didn't shake. I started seeing this pattern with everyone. Rapid aging over months, then sudden youth, like someone had rewound their biological clock. But each cycle left them slightly more wrong than before. Their movements became more mechanical, their blinks synchronized when multiple people were present. Most disturbing was how their injuries healed in reverse. Cuts would appear on young skin, get infected and fester as they aged, then disappear when youth returned, leaving scars that didn't match any wound I'd ever seen. The young people appearing around town weren't teenagers visiting family. They were the aged residents, restored to youth but carrying something else with them, something that made children in other towns cry when these teenagers came near, something that made dogs howl and scratch at their own faces until they bled. In November, I followed one of my delivery addresses instead of just dropping off packages. 528 Oak Street didn't exist on any map, but the GPS, when it worked, showed it as a real location. I found a dirt road behind the abandoned school, tire tracks leading into woods that were too quiet, too still, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. The building I found was new construction, disguised to look old. Concrete and steel painted to resemble weathered wood. But if you looked closely, you could see the seams where prefab sections had been joined. Modern ventilation systems disguised as old chimneys, security cameras camouflaged as birdhouses, and underneath it all, a humming that you felt in your bones rather than heard with your ears. Through the windows, I saw people in lab coats working with equipment that belonged in major research hospitals, not rural Oregon. But it was the smell coming from the building that made me understand this wasn't just medical research. Sweet and rotting, like fruit left in the sun, but underneath that was something metallic and sharp that reminded me of the taste you get in your mouth before you vomit. I watched for 2 hours and saw the truth that still wakes me up screaming. The aged residents weren't just getting treatments, they were being harvested. I watched them wheel Margaret Fawcett in on a gurney, ancient and dying. Through the window, I saw them connect tubes to her arms and drain something dark and thick into collection bags. Then they injected her with something that made her body convulse and change. Skin tightening, hair darkening, years falling away like shed clothing. But what came off the gurney wasn't Margaret anymore. It moved like Margaret, had her face and voice, but its eyes reflected light like an animal's. When it smiled at the technicians, I counted too many teeth. The harvested material went into the packages I'd been delivering to the other residents. They weren't just aging and getting young again. They were sharing biological material, becoming connected in ways that human beings weren't meant to be connected. A collective organism wearing individual faces. That's when I saw the bones. Not graves behind the building, feeding stations. Piles of human remains picked clean by things that weren't quite human anymore. Skulls with bite marks from teeth that grew in spirals. Femurs snapped open for marrow that had been sucked out through holes that were perfectly round, too precise for any animal mouth. The residents of Antelope weren't test subjects. They were larvae. The experiments weren't trying to reverse aging. They were creating something new. Something that could wear human shapes but wasn't limited by human biology. The pharmaceutical companies weren't looking for anti-aging treatments. They were developing biological weapons that could replace entire populations without anyone noticing until it was too late. I ran back to my truck, but they were already waiting. Not the security guards, the residents themselves. All of them, standing in a perfect circle around my vehicle. Margaret Fawcett, young again but wrong, tilted her head at an angle that would have snapped a human neck. Her mouth opened and something wet and black unfolded from between her teeth, tasting the air like a snake's tongue. "Carlos," she said. But her voice came from behind me. I turned and she was still in front of me, mouth moving, but the sound originated from a different direction entirely. "You've been such a reliable delivery service." The others were moving closer, but not walking. Gliding like their feet weren't quite touching the ground. Their faces were shifting subtly, features flowing like heated wax, becoming more similar to each other with each passing second. "We've grown quite fond of you," Margaret continued, her voice now coming from all of them simultaneously. "Such dedication, such punctuality, such beautiful, uncontaminated biology." I made it to my truck, but the engine wouldn't start. The dashboard lights were strobing in patterns that hurt to look at, and the radio was broadcasting my own voice reading my delivery routes from 3 years ago. My hands were leaving bloody prints on the steering wheel, though I couldn't remember cutting them. That's when I realized the packages I'd been delivering contained more than biological material. They were connected to me somehow, had been marking me, changing me slowly over 3 years of exposure. My aging wasn't just from stress, it was synchronization. They were preparing me to join their collective. I could feel it starting, my thoughts becoming clearer but less my own. My movements more efficient but less human. The urge to return next Wednesday, to deliver more packages, to help more residents become what they were becoming. But I still had enough of myself left to fight it. I smashed the truck's window and climbed out, cutting my hands on glass that was too sharp, too perfectly shaped to be natural. The residents moved to surround me again, but they moved as one organism now, and single organisms have single weaknesses. I had started carrying a camera after the electronics began failing, thinking I'd document the strange behavior for some kind of complaint. The camera was dead, but it still had weight. I threw it as hard as I could at Margaret's face. The sound she made wasn't human. None of their sounds were human. They all screamed at once, a noise like metal being torn apart, and I felt something snap in my head like a rubber band breaking. Suddenly, I could think clearly again, and what I was thinking was run. I ran through woods that tried to trip me, past trees that whispered my name and voices of people I'd known who were dead. The forest itself was infected, changed by whatever was happening in that laboratory. Plants grew in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Animals watched from shadows with too many eyes, or eyes in the wrong places, or no eyes at all but still clearly seeing. I made it to the highway and flagged down a trucker who took one look at my bleeding hands and terrified face and drove me straight to Portland. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but the words came out wrong, confused, like part of my mind was still connected to something in Antelope. The investigative journalist I found, Sarah Chen, thought I was having a psychotic break until she had my blood tested. The results showed genetic modifications that don't exist in nature, cellular structures that seem to be part human and part something else. When she tried to publish her findings, her editor killed the story, and she was transferred to cover high school sports. It took 3 weeks to find someone who would listen. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell at OHSU had been tracking unusual medical cases across rural Oregon and recognized what I was describing. She'd found similar genetic modifications in patients from other small towns, always associated with pharmaceutical research programs that officially didn't exist. Dr. Hartwell contacted federal authorities, but by the time they raided Antelope, the laboratory was gone. Completely gone, like it had never existed. Just bare ground where the building had been, soil that tested positive for biological contamination but negative for any known substances. The residents were gone too. All 46 of them vanished without a trace. No forwarding addresses, no death certificates, no record of them ever living anywhere else. It was like they'd been erased from existence. But I know they weren't destroyed. They evolved, moved on to the next phase of whatever they were becoming, because I still feel them sometimes. Late at night, when my hands start bleeding again, a presence at the edge of my consciousness, patient and vast and completely alien. They're still connected to me through whatever modifications they made to my DNA, still waiting for me to finish becoming whatever they wanted me to become. The government classified everything, paid me to stay quiet, gave me a new identity, moved me to a different state. But the modifications they made to my biology are permanent. I age differently now, faster some days, slower others, sometimes not at all. My reflection doesn't always match my movements. My shadow falls in directions that don't match the light source. Dr. Hartwell was found dead in her office 6 months later. Apparent suicide, but the security cameras showed her having a conversation with someone who wasn't there, someone she seemed to recognize and trust. Her final notes mentioned breakthrough research into consciousness transfer and biological networking that could revolutionize medicine. Her research disappeared with her death. I don't work as a driver anymore. Can't. Every time I get behind the wheel, I feel the urge to drive back to Antelope, to finish what they started. Instead, I work night security at a Portland warehouse, surrounded by concrete and steel and nothing organic that they could use to reach me. But I know they're still out there, still spreading, still evolving. Because the Antelope experiment wasn't unique. Dr. Hartwell's files mention similar programs in Nevada, Montana, Wyoming, anywhere isolated populations could be converted without attracting attention. Small towns where people disappear gradually and no one notices because no one expects small towns to last forever anyway. If you ever find yourself driving through rural areas and notice a town where something feels off, where your electronics malfunction, where the people move wrong, where children are afraid for reasons they can't explain, don't stop, don't deliver anything, don't even slow down. Because once you're marked, once they start changing you, there's no going back to being entirely human. And the thing they're creating, the collective organism wearing human faces, doesn't plan to stay hidden in small towns forever. They're practicing, learning, getting ready for somewhere with a much larger population. The bleeding in my hands has started again as I write this. That means they're close. That means it's time to move to another city, another state, another attempt to stay ahead of whatever I'm becoming. But I wanted people to know the truth first. About Antelope, about the experiments, about what's coming for the rest of us. When the small towns start emptying out completely, when entire rural populations vanish overnight and the government explains it as economic migration, remember this story. Remember that some disappearances aren't abandonment, they're recruitment, and they're getting hungry for cities. My name is Tom Richards, and I've been documenting what really happened in Mitchell, Oregon, because the families deserve better than the lies being spread about them. I was the janitor at Mitchell Elementary for 3 months in 2019, and I'm probably the only person left alive who saw the truth about what those things did to our children. I'm writing this from a motel room in Bend, looking over my shoulder every few minutes because I know they're still out there. The FBI closed their investigation. The state police won't return my calls. But the families of Mitchell deserve to know what happened to their babies before I disappear too. I'm 48 years old, been working maintenance and custodial for over 25 years. Started cleaning office buildings in Portland after high school, worked construction until a crane accident crushed 3 vertebrae in my lower back. After 2 surgeries and a year of physical therapy, I went back to janitorial work because it was all my body could handle. I've cleaned hospitals where people died screaming, crime scenes after the police finished, and homeless camps where desperation hung in the air like fog. I thought I'd seen the worst humanity had to offer. I was wrong. Mitchell sits in the high desert of Wheeler County, population 127 at last count. Cattle ranching country, where families work spreads that cover thousands of acres, and the nearest neighbor might be 20 miles away. The elementary school serves kids from across the county. Some ride buses for over an hour each way, leaving home before sunrise and getting back after dark. I took the job in September 2019 after my unemployment benefits ran out. The pay was barely above minimum wage, but it came with health insurance and housing, to a small trailer behind the school that the district provided for the custodian. Mrs. Helen Henderson, the principal, seemed desperate to fill the position. The previous janitor left suddenly, she explained. During my interview, her hands shaking slightly as she poured coffee. Family emergency back east. We need someone reliable who can work independently. She didn't mention that Carl Edmonds, the previous janitor, had worked at Mitchell Elementary for 12 years before vanishing in August without notice. I found that out later from the gas station owner in town. Carl's truck was still in his driveway, Bill Hendricks told me while I was buying cigarettes. Keys on the kitchen table, wallet in his bedroom. But Carl was just gone. Sheriff said he probably hitched a ride out of town, but Carl loved that job. Talked about those kids like they were his own grandchildren. The school building itself was constructed in 1964, a single-story brick structure designed to withstand the harsh desert winters. Thick walls, small windows, and a maze-like ventilation system that connected every room. My job was simple: arrive at 4 p.m. after the kids went home, clean classrooms, empty trash, maintain the building, and lock up by 10 p.m. The trailer Carl had lived in still contained his belongings. Clothes in the closet, food in the refrigerator, family photos on the nightstand, as if he'd just stepped out for groceries. Mrs. Henderson said the district was handling his affairs, but his stuff just sat there, gathering dust. My first week passed without incident. The building was well maintained, and the kids seemed like typical small-town children, polite, curious, maybe a little too quiet. But it was their artwork that caught my attention immediately. Every classroom was covered with student drawings, but these weren't the usual rainbows and stick figures you'd expect from elementary students. These children drew creatures, detailed, sophisticated illustrations of insect-like beings with elongated limbs, compound eyes, and segmented bodies. The drawings showed these creatures in desert landscapes around buildings that looked exactly like local ranches, and the school itself. In Mrs. Patricia Larson's 3rd grade classroom, 8-year-old Emma Chen had drawn a family of 4 standing outside a house while dark figures watched from behind hills. The detail was incredible. You could see the fear in the stick figures' faces, the menacing posture of the watchers. At the bottom, in careful block letters, Emma had written, "The night they came for us." I asked Mrs. Larson about the artwork while emptying her trash bins. She glanced at Emma's drawing and quickly turned it face down. "The children have been having nightmares," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Dr. Morrison says it's normal for kids this age to have active imaginations about desert wildlife." But Dr. Morrison, the town's only physician, had pulled his own granddaughter out of school 2 weeks earlier. Family trip, according to the office records. The teachers all reacted the same way when I mentioned the drawings. Nervous deflection, quick subject changes, eyes that darted to the windows like they expected to see something watching. And I noticed that pickup time had become almost frantic. Parents would arrive exactly at dismissal, collect their children quickly, and drive away without the usual socializing. No after-school activities, no kids playing on the playground. By 4:15 p.m., the parking lot was empty except for my beat-up Ford. During my second week, I found the scratches, deep gouges in the drywall near the windows of every classroom, always at shoulder height for an adult. 4 parallel lines, too wide for human fingers, carved into the walls like something had been testing the barriers between inside and outside. The marks were fresh. White gypsum dust still clung to the grooves. I documented everything with photos and reported it to Mrs. Henderson the next morning. She studied the images on my phone with trembling hands. "Vandalism," she said finally. "I'll contact the sheriff's department." Sheriff Ray Kowalski came by that afternoon, a big man with tired eyes who'd been protecting Wheeler County for over 20 years. He examined the scratches with the same expression I'd seen on combat veterans. Alas, someone who'd witnessed things that didn't fit into normal categories. "Tom," he said quietly as we stood in Mrs. Larson's classroom, "how much did Mrs. Henderson tell you about why you got this job?" Previous janitor had a family emergency. Sheriff Kowalski was quiet for a long moment, staring at the claw marks. Carl Edmonds didn't have any family. Been alone since his wife died 6 years ago. He turned to face me. The night Carl disappeared, I got a call about screaming coming from the school. When I arrived, the building was locked up tight, but Carl's cleaning cart was in the hallway and there was blood on the floor near these same scratch marks. What happened to him? Officially, he left town for personal reasons. Unofficially, Sheriff Kowalski lowered his voice. "I think something took him. Same something that's been taking families from this county for the past year." That's when I learned about the others. The Morrison family had vanished in July. Oversight. Live 2 parents and 2 children, gone from their ranch without a trace. The Washingtons disappeared in May, leaving behind cattle that starved in their pens. The Chen family, the Kowalskis, Sheriff Ray's own brother and sister-in-law, the Hendersons, all gone within the past 12 months. 12 families, Sheriff Kowalski said. 43 people total, including 16 children, all taken during new moon periods when the nights are darkest. Why haven't I heard about this? Where's the state police? FBI? They came, investigated for 2 weeks, found no evidence of foul play. Officially, all these families were located for better opportunities. The federal agent said there was no pattern, no connection, case closed. But Sheriff Kowalski had kept investigating on his own. The families that disappeared all had children enrolled at the elementary school. And every time, weird things started happening in the building about 2 weeks before they vanished. I felt ice forming in my stomach. What kind of weird things? Scratches on the walls, strange smells in the ventilation system, and the children would start drawing those pictures you found. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Emma Chen's drawing, about the families that had vanished, about Carl Edmonds' blood on the classroom floor. Around midnight, I decided to walk over to the school and look around. The building felt different in the darkness. Heavier somehow, like the air itself was pressing down. I used my keys to enter through the main office, my flashlight cutting narrow paths through the familiar hallways. That's when I heard the scratching. Deliberate, rhythmic sounds coming from inside the walls. Not random rodent activity. One teen live, this had pattern and purpose. I followed the noise through the building, and it seemed to be moving ahead of me, leading me toward the supply closet near the library. The ceiling access panel was slightly askew. I grabbed a stepladder and climbed up to investigate, flashlight in one hand, phone recording video with the other. The space above the ceiling was larger than I expected, running throughout the entire building, and it wasn't empty. Webs. Massive, intricate webs made from some kind of transparent material that caught my flashlight beam like fiber optic cables. But these weren't spider webs. They were too geometric, too purposeful. They looked almost technological, like a 3-dimensional computer network suspended in the darkness. Attached to the webs were objects I recognized: Carl Edmonds' janitor keys, a child's pink backpack with Emma written in marker, photographs of the missing families, medical records from Dr. Morrison's office, all arranged in careful patterns around what looked like monitoring equipment that definitely wasn't made by humans. I was documenting everything with my phone when I noticed the shed skin. Translucent husks hanging from the webs like empty cocoons, each one roughly human-sized. Under my flashlight, I could see the details, segmented sections, areas where limbs had been, facial features that looked almost familiar. The material moved slightly in the air currents, creating the illusion that the husks were still alive. That's when I realized what I was looking at. These weren't cocoons. They were molted skins, and some of them had faces I recognized from the missing family photos. I was backing toward the access panel when the smell hit me. Sweet and cloying, like overripe fruit mixed with industrial chemicals. My vision started to blur, and I realized I was breathing some kind of narcotic compound. Fighting against the growing dizziness, I managed to climb down from the ceiling and stumble toward the exit. But the chemical smell was getting stronger, and my coordination was failing. I collapsed in the main hallway, my phone skittering across the linoleum as darkness closed in. When I regained consciousness, I wasn't alone. 6 creatures stood in a circle around me, each about the size of a large dog, but built like insects that had learned to walk upright. Their bodies were segmented and covered in the same translucent material I'd found in the vents, but underneath I could see human features, faces, hands, hair, integrated into their alien anatomy. The closest one leaned down, and I found myself staring into compound eyes that held fragments of human intelligence. When it spoke, the voice was layered, one Hindestri, multiple human voices speaking in harmony, including some I recognized. "Hello, Tom." The creature's voice included tones I remembered from my brief conversations with Carl Edmonds. "We've been waiting for you to find us." The chemical smell was stronger now, but instead of making me unconscious, it seemed to be allowing me to understand their communication, pheromone-based language that my drugged brain could somehow process. "We are the harvest," the creature continued, and now I could hear Dr. Morrison's voice mixed with Carl's. "We have been studying your species for optimal integration." Another creature moved closer, and I saw Emma Chen's face partially visible beneath its translucent skin. When it spoke, Emma's voice was part of the harmony. "The process requires living subjects for biological compatibility testing. Your children provide the most adaptable genetic material." Horror crashed over me as I understood what had happened to the missing families. They hadn't been killed, they'd been transformed, absorbed into these creatures that retained fragments of their human memories and personalities while serving some larger hive intelligence. "The school provides ideal observation opportunities," the Carl thing explained. "We study behavioral patterns, family structures, genetic compatibility through the children's daily activities. When suitable subjects are identified, we collect them for integration." "Why?" I managed to ask through the chemical haze. "Our species requires biological diversity to survive environmental adaptation. Your planet's atmosphere and gravity require genetic modification. Human DNA provides necessary flexibility." The Emma creature moved even closer, and I could see more human faces layered beneath its insectoid exterior. All the missing children, their features blended into something that was no longer fully human or alien. "We offer you the same choice we offered Carl," it said in a voice that combined all the lost children. "Join the harvest willingly, or resist and be taken by force. Either way, you will become part of us." I pretended to consider while my mind raced. These things had been operating in Mitchell for over a year, systematically harvesting families, while the authorities either couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge what was happening. The children's drawings hadn't been imagination, they'd been warnings, desperate attempts to communicate what they were seeing. "I need time to think," I said. "Time is limited," the Carl thing replied. "The next collection is scheduled for tomorrow night. The remaining families will be gathered during the new moon phase." Tomorrow night, that meant every family left in Mitchell, maybe 20 adults and 30 children, would disappear unless I could stop it. The creatures allowed me to leave, confident that I couldn't effectively oppose them. They were wrong. I spent the next day preparing. Not for confrontation. I knew I couldn't fight these things directly. Instead, I focused on documentation and communication. I uploaded all my photos and videos to cloud storage accounts, made copies of everything, and prepared detailed reports for every news outlet, law enforcement agency, and paranormal investigator I could find contact information for. Then I called Sheriff Kowalski. "Ray, it's Tom Richards. I need you to listen carefully and not hang up, no matter how crazy this sounds." I told him everything. The creatures in the ceiling, the transformed humans, the planned harvest of the remaining families. To his credit, Sheriff Kowalski listened without interrupting. "Jesus Christ, Tom. I knew something like this had to be happening, but hearing it." His voice was shaky. "What do you need me to do?" "Tonight, at sunset, I need you to evacuate every family left in the county. Tell them there's a gas leak at the school, chemical contamination, anything that will get them to leave immediately. Drive them to Fossil or Madras, anywhere at least 50 miles away. What about you? I'm going to make sure those things can't follow." That evening, I returned to the school with every piece of equipment I could gather. Gasoline from my truck, road, flares from the emergency kit, the propane torch I used for maintenance work, and Carl Edmund's spare keys, which I'd found in his trailer. The creatures were expecting me. As soon as I entered the building, they emerged from the vents and ceiling spaces. Dozens of them now. More than I'd seen before. The Carl thing approached first. "You have made your decision?" "Yes," I said. "I've decided to burn this place to the ground." I triggered the first road flare and tossed it into the gasoline I'd poured throughout the main hallway. The flames spread quickly, and the creatures shrieked in harmonized human voices as the fire reached their web network in the ceiling. But they didn't just retreat. They attacked. The next few minutes were pure nightmare. Creatures that had once been my neighbors and their children swarmed around me, trying to drag me toward the spaces they'd prepared for integration. I fought them with the propane torch, setting their webs on fire, destroying the monitoring equipment they'd built throughout the school. The Emma thing grabbed my arm, and I felt something like electric shock as it tried to inject me with transformation chemicals. I managed to break free and ignite another section of their network, but more creatures kept emerging from spaces I hadn't known existed. The fire spread faster than I'd expected. Within minutes, the entire building was becoming an inferno, and I realized I might not make it out alive. But the creatures were in worse shape. Their biological network was burning, and they seemed unable to function independently once it was destroyed. I made it to the exit just as the roof began to collapse. Behind me, I could hear the creatures screaming in voices I recognized. Carl, Emma, Doctor, Morrison, all the lost families crying out as their transformed bodies were finally released from whatever had been controlling them. Sheriff Kowalski found me sitting in my truck, watching the school burn. He'd successfully evacuated 23 families, 67 people who would have been taken that night. "It's over?" he asked. "This part is," I said. "But there are probably other sites, other schools. This was just one harvesting operation." The official story blamed the fire on faulty electrical wiring. The state fire marshal found accelerants but ruled it an accident. Mrs. Henderson collected insurance money and moved to California. The school district consolidated with neighboring counties, and Mitchell Elementary was never rebuilt. I left Wheeler County the next week. Couldn't stay in a place where I'd seen what humans could become. But I've continued monitoring reports from small towns across the Pacific Northwest, looking for patterns. Children drawing strange creatures, families disappearing during new moon phases, unexplained scratches on school walls. I've found 17 locations that match the pattern. 17 schools where something like what happened in Mitchell might be happening right now. The FBI won't listen. Local authorities are either compromised or too scared to investigate. But I'm documenting everything, building a database of evidence that can't be ignored forever. If you live in a small town and your children start drawing monsters, pay attention. If families begin disappearing and authorities dismiss it as relocations for job opportunities, start asking questions. If you work in a school and find scratches on walls, shed skin in ventilation systems, or evidence that someone is studying your students, don't ignore it. Most importantly, if you encounter creatures that speak with the voices of missing people, don't listen to their offers. Fire works. Destroying their networks disrupts their control. And sometimes, saving the living means letting the transformed finally die. I'm still out here, still watching, still documenting, because the families of Mitchell deserved better than lies about job, relocations, and every child drawing pictures of monsters deserves someone who will believe them. The harvest is real, and it's happening in more places than anyone wants to admit. But it can be stopped. One school, One town, one person willing to light the match at a time.